Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where we take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the monster supplement Underdark Dwellers, Exiles and Elementals, designed by Stormcrow Dreamscapes for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Now, I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition for about 7 years now, and I am embarrassed to say that the Underdark is not an area we have ever actually explored yet in all of that time of playing. I am aware of the Underdark. I know of it. I know its existence. I have read through and reviewed Out of the Abyss, but never actually ventured in there myself. But if you have, or if you are planning on it, then Underdark Dwellers is a monster book that includes about 75 or so stat blocks of creatures that reside in the Underdark. So you've got your kobolds, your drow, your dwergar, but also different factions and cults that may be found within the Underdark. And obviously, you know, as a DM, you could move these things around to different pocket caves and things of that nature. But really what you're also getting is a lot of NPC variants. And by that, I mean, you know, in the 5e monster manual, you get to the last, 20 or 25 pages or so of that, maybe not even that many. And it's just like, scout and noble and assassin and mage. They're not the most exciting stat blocks because they're just, humanoid people. And yet, those are some of the most commonly used ones that I've come to expect from D&D. Your bandits and bandit captains and all that. Those are the ones you end up using all the time because a lot of times you're just fighting, bad folks who are not like monsters necessarily. They're just, people with trained skills like the player characters are. So those are very, very helpful stat blocks to have, even if they're not the most, exciting monster stat blocks. And that's kind of what reminds me of this book here. It's a lot of different, Acers, which are the kind of fiery dwarf elemental creatures. There's a bunch of different drow. There's a lot of cultists, different kind of cultist stat blocks. And those are all very helpful to have, and I appreciate having them. It's just not the most exciting or necessarily creatively interesting monsters that you're going to come across. There are a few in here that I will highlight, but for the most part, they're going to be those kind of NPC. I'm calling them NPC variants. I don't know what the proper terminology is, but the ones that really you can substitute any kind of, general humanoid creature for, and they've just got this certain, essentially player class like the players do, but typically not nearly as powerful. Probably one of the best ones that's expanded on is the first one, which are the Acers. These are the they look like fire dwarves, I guess. They've got kind of these bronze skin and this flaming head dress, and I think we only have like one base Acer. There may be another one that's in the monster manual. And this one expands that and gives us another 6 Acer stat blocks, including a clan lord who can summon a flame hound, which is also included here as like Acer adjacent creatures. So if you're going to think about having a whole dungeon with these creatures in it, having multiple kinds of stat blocks is really, really useful versus having just the one stat block that's used over and over and over again, or that you have to go in and modify yourself. So as a DM, I think this is very appreciative of having this if you're obviously going to use this kind of creature. In fact, I think having a flame themed or an Acer themed dungeon, this probably would sell this supplement alone, because not only do we get 6 stat blocks, but I love all the flame adjacent creatures. The flame hound is very awesome. The fire bat, which reminds me of the Diablo 3 witch doctor who can throw out all the bats as a skill. The blazing skeleton who can burst and then throw flaming bones of itself at creatures. The fire bat like attaches to you and just slowly does fire damage once it hits. These are all very, very cool creatures. The rune master can I think the fiery shackles thing is actually from the whatever the rune fighter class is from. Was it Tasha's, where you can like kind of throw these magical shackles that wrap around somebody and then deal constant fire damage. And of course they've all got the heated weapon, the heated body that the Acers have. So I think that's really cool to expand on those, and you could really quickly see how you could form a pretty effective Acer themed dungeon out of just those stat blocks and creatures. Other ones are maybe not quite as exciting. The Shadow Cultists and Monsters, it's a little too generic for me. I wouldn't get nearly as excited. Also, there's an odd formatting thing that this book does that I need to complain about. I think there is precedent for this in the Monster Manual, where maybe it was like the Giants or some, a couple creatures did this, where it mentioned, I think the Demons did this, the Demon section of Monster Manual, where it has all the information at the beginning of the section. So in this case, hey, here's all your shadow creatures. And then it lists the descriptions here, and then it lists the pictures and the stat blocks after that, which means if you want to know more about this creature, you got to kind of flip back and forth, which I hate. Also, in this particular section, it leaves all of this blank, section right here where you could just as easily put the descriptions here, which I'm not sure why you wouldn't do that. And also the art. So this uses, from what I can tell, pretty much all stock art, which there's a big art discourse right now going on in the D&D world that's very interesting to follow, and I try to choose my words carefully. Stock art exists for a reason. I think it should be used to fill out a book. It's can be very helpful for a lot of creators. I will say that if there's any book that is hurt by only using stock art, it's going to be the monster book, because a lot of folks, they're going to get excited or motivated and interested in your creatures based on their art. And not everybody's going to have, Monster Manual Expanded obviously set this insanely high bar where it was all this gorgeous, like huge, bespoke art for every single creature in there, just like the Monster Manual. Like, that's awesome, but I don't expect that level of detail or money put into every single product that I'm reviewing. But that being said, it's almost like I don't know. This is kind of showing off the stock art in a way that probably shouldn't have been shown off, if that makes sense. Like, if you're going to use it, you can do that. Having it be for pretty much every single creature, I think, is a bit of a bummer. And if you're at least going to do it, then don't make that necessarily the central part of your page here, which is kind of what ends up happening. So it sucks that I have to complain about art, and I don't like doing. I mean, there's some really low resolution stuff in here, which is kind of nasty. Like, this picture does not need to be this big, and you need to have more description here. So it's a lot of, I guess it's a formatting complaint. I wish the art were better, but I understand why people use stock art, and I think it should be used, and that's not an automatic, con for me. But I think the way that this book has been put together and formatted, with the art kind of being more front and center, as if it were really nice, like bespoke art created for each of these creatures, I think I do have a bit of a problem with that. So I think in that way it weirdly detracted. And the other problem is, most people aren't seeing stock art over and over and over like I am, right? Like, I review so many products that I can recognize so much stock art by now. So it's different for me than it is probably the average person. And even then, I try not to let it bother me too much when I see it, when I see the same kind of pictures over and over again. But in this case, and I've already gone on way too long of a rant, but it's unfortunate that the art just doesn't really help sell this book necessarily, because it's stock art. I've seen it over and over again, and it's not just even in necessarily great quality stock art. I would have rather had the descriptions, and I just hate having to flip back and forth to the description of the creature versus the stat block itself too. So the shadow creatures aren't as interesting. The Cult of the Scorpion is a little bit more interesting, and I do think there's an advantage here where the designer has actually organized these in a very smart way. This, formatting aside, the way most Monster Manual books are all alphabetical. This one doesn't actually do that. Instead, it lists them by faction, or by race, or by their god worship. Like, there's the Cult of Shar, or the Mask, or I wrote down some of them: Abathor, the dwarven god of greed; Chalsin, which is the god of male drow who are trying to rise up and defeat their oppressors that are the Loth worshippers. So that's pretty cool, because you can kind of see how you could form an entire faction of enemy here. One thing I would love that I don't see any monster books doing is give me some suggestion encounter tables for groups of these monsters together. I think would go a lot far, especially if you've got them in, if you've got different kinds of stat blocks, but that are grouped up to where they're allies of each other. So in this case, like the Scorpion, Seer, Cultist, captain. It's almost worked kind of like the Yuan-Ti, where there's like a hierarchy of monstrous creatures. I would have loved to have a table go with this. That would be an extra thing that I don't see a lot of books doing. Kind of a suggestion is include some tables for like, hey, here's, if the party's tier 1, maybe here's the kind of, encounter they would come across, or maybe even if there was a dungeon that could be stocked with this, amount of creatures or something. That would be pretty helpful. And yes, as a DM, obviously I can do that work, but I still like seeing those kind of tables. So those are some fun ideas. The Umberlee creatures, obviously I'm definitely a sucker for underwater themed dungeons and creatures. I particularly like the Wave Master because it's like this half, kind of like an Ursula looking half octopus, half spellcaster creature. In fact, you could probably use Ursula for this. Got tentacles, the Ink Cloud, a lightning ray ability on top of having a bunch of cool, water themed spells, which is very nifty. We're going to skip ahead to, kobolds are fine, but I think Kobold Press kind of wrote the book on interesting kobolds. Having a Drow Druid is interesting. A Dwargar Rustmancer who's got the Psychic Short Sword as well as the Rust Monster ability, which I hate that ability, but to each their own. The Dwargar Were-Rhino is a really fun idea to take a creature which already has very unique abilities, which is the Dwargar, which has the ability to enlarge themselves as well as turn invisibility. Very, very fun stat block, by the way, if the DM, the Dwargar. And then give them a lycanthropy of a unique creature type, which is this rhino. So I love the idea of, that'd be a fun idea anyway. It's just give a creature who is a non-humanoid also lycanthropy and combine those two things together to create an interesting stat block, which is what the Dwargar Were-Rhino is. So very interesting idea there. The Faerzris, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but I do recall is like some like clouds of madness or magic that can like waft through the Underdark, and that can infect different creatures. So we've got a elemental as well as a boule here that has different elemental abilities, as well as just, or not elemental, arcane abilities, and things like magic resistance and wild magic surge table. Followers of Elistri, which is one I'd forgotten, is like the good drow. So we got some new stat blocks for them. And again, these stat blocks aren't there. A lot of them are taking existing stat blocks from the monster manual that are those, the noble and the scout and the bandit and all those, or ones that were introduced maybe later on in the Sword Ghost Adventures Guide or something else, and then maybe switching them, modifying things a little bit, and then applying them to different base races, which I think is fine and actually very useful to have. They're just not the most exciting to comment on or review. I do like the Insane Cleric of the Elder Cults who can like charm. Is this one that can charm? No, I think that was a Kaordi that could actually charm people. The Kaordi are these crazy looking alien creatures. Again, this weird low resolution art style though. That they can bite people and then charm them, and they have a horrifying ability that I would absolutely not use as a DM. As a bonus action, the Kaordi targets one living creature within 5 feet of it that is charmed by the Kaordi, and again, they charm them by biting them is like a side effect. Transferring images of cosmic horror through its bite. After the target finishes a long rest, which means we've already fought these things, we've done with our adventuring day, we're going down for a long rest. The target must succeed on a DC 14 con save or rise as a Kaordi thrall, where they literally just become a creature like transformed into a slave of this other alien creature. After the that's so terrible. Like, not only is that just terrible in general, but to have that after a long rest where the party, like, that could be weeks after our D&D session after we fought these creatures. What a bizarre thing to do. Like, the way I would change that is to be a temporary thing where it can basically do a temporary dominate monster on you during the battle itself. I think that would be pretty fun and interesting. But holy crap, like a permanent way of just mind crapping over somebody's entire character because of a failed save, like, that really sucks. I don't like that idea at all, so watch out for that one. The Mascaran Shadow I do love. Has a lot of really great, fun teleporting, shadowy, dark abilities. Evasion's really good. Just kind of a high-level rogue who also kind of has like that monk, the Shadow Monk ability to teleport in the shadows. And also has the Shadow's Strength Drain ability. So a lot of really, really great tools for DMs to put together and use in this one nifty stat block. So big thumbs up to the Mascaran Shadow, which is supposed to be, again, the god of shadows and thievery, mask, like a very devout worshiper of them that's been transformed. Some Mephit variants are very fun. The Earth Mephit can enlarge and basically cast the Shatter spell. The Death Mephit has like a weakening spray. Of course, they all have the Death Burst where they explode into whatever their stuff is made of. The Mineral Mephit basically has like color spray, so that's always fun. Mephits are fun. Ormir, one of the few completely original creatures, this giant worm thing. The base one is huge, and then the Chieftain is gargantuan, which is gigantic. CR7 and CR10, and they're kind of boring. They're basically, their whole thing is they covet magic and they love magic stuff, but they can't cast magic themselves. They end up using a lot of magic weapons. Unfortunately, that is not in their stat block at all, so they just have basic weapon attacks, and then they're like constricting ability and magic resistance. So it's a neat idea and kind of a cool picture. I don't know if this is stock art, but it's unfortunately ended up being a little bit more boring. Orogs are kind of evil orcs. Gonsmen are clockwork creatures. We don't get enough clockwork creatures, so shout out to anything that's not the what are the things called? The modrons. That's what I think of. Things that are different than that. So I like both these creatures. The clockwork cockroach, which can spray its acid and climb around. They can both do self-repair, and the sentry can actually repair other robots. So clearly having creatures in there that can heal other creatures makes them a big target for the players. The only one with layer actions is this Ruin Chanter, which are some Fae that supposedly just haunt, ruins that are in the Underdark, and they can also summon these Ruin Elementals, which are very cool looking, but don't actually have that interesting of abilities. The Dragonsick Cultist has the Gibbering Mouthers Gibbering ability, which designer just copy and pasted, which I'm totally fine with that. I've absolutely done that several times. People that watch my crafting streams know I basically start with existing monsters and then add and modify from there, so that's never going to be necessarily a complaint of mine, and I think these are all very useful, very nice to have stat blocks overall. The Ghost Dwarf Swarm reminds me of the Lord of the Rings, where you've just got swarms of these ghostly creatures, which all have very cool implications when you've got a giant swarm of ghosts come together. And then at the very end, a few magic items. It's odd when you give me like a couple magic items. Like, it's great that it's there. I don't know if I can praise it because you didn't give me like necessarily a whole magic item section, but I also didn't expect any magic items in my monster book, so that's good, I guess. I kind of would have liked more, but again, this wasn't a magic item book, and it wasn't even an Underdark, like complete Underdark book. It was just an Underdark monster book, so it's just a bonus, I guess. But I do like this like Dwerger specific hammer that's very powerful if you are a Dwerger. All right, so let's go over my pros and cons for Underdark Dwellers, Exiles and Elementals. Pro, over 70 Underdark themed stat blocks from CR 1/4 to CR 12. There is a ton of content here, which I do appreciate, and I do like that they've all got a very strong theme. They're all Underdark creatures, things you would find in the Underdark. That's pretty easy. Pro, they're helpfully organized by faction, race, or god instead of necessarily being alphabetical, which I think is really quite useful. I wish a lot of monster books did that, in fact, and grouped them together so that I could see these groupings. I love it when I can look at creatures similar to how Prince of the Apocalypse had a bunch of, cult-specific creatures and decide, ooh, now I can just, I can figure out how to group these creatures up into different quantities and types and styles, and really throw some different variety at the players while still having the theme of it's this one, faction. So I did think that was very helpful and really got me excited about, being motivated to use some of these factions as an entire, side dungeon. I think the Acer with their Acer adjacent creatures were definitely the best. They were the highlight of this book. But other ones could work out, pretty well and could even supplement other things like a Drow adventure. There's some Drow stuff in here. The Cult of the Scorpion, you could do a whole little dungeon crawl there. It would be nice if the designer included some tables or things in there, but that's not an official con. That's just a, it would be nice comment. And that goes into my other pro, which is that there are new or expanded cult ideas. So me getting excited about using some of these interesting cult things or things I would not have maybe considered before. The Abathor, which is like evil dwarves following this dwarven god of greed. What kind of stat blocks would they be gifted because of that, or different Umberly creatures that could make up this one different temple, and what kind of creatures in addition to the cultists would serve Umberly, or having that mask shadow creature in a mask temple. Those are all pretty solid ideas. Cons, the art is unfortunately a con, specifically a lot of this low resolution stock art that just doesn't look good on a regular. I mean, I'm only on when it was its default to like 78% or something, it already looks very pixelated and blown up. I'm okay with using stock art. I really want to emphasize this. I'm totally fine with using stock art. If you want to use stock art to fill out your book, that's cool. I will say that if you're doing a monster book, you really need to try whatever you can to at least have some non-stock art in there, because that's going to go a long way to motivating me to using your creatures and allow you to use creatures that you're actually thinking of and not just that you're trying to apply to existing artwork. And the other con, which bleeds into the art problem, is the formatting issue that plagues some of these areas, namely these poor shadow guys, where there's just too much of the stock art, honestly, and then you have to flip back and forth to get to the actual description of the creatures. So it's unfortunate that I think the content of the book is fine, with the caveat that's not the most, interesting monsters, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But just the physical put togetherness of the book is really where all my cons end up stemming from. Final verdict, NPC variants aren't the most exciting stat blocks, but new Drow, Acer, Kobold, Mephit, and Cultist options from Underdark Dwellers are helpful when stocking an Underdark adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, William, I'm Loud, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic Roleplayer, Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, David, Jam and Clams, Christina, Corey, Koa1337, Jacob, and Eric. And gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, Scott, Humanoid Size, Sphincter, Stephanie, and Refus. Thank you all very much for your support.